Casey Jones was real. His experiences on the Illinois Central Railroad were real. He was not a legendary figure as so many of our folk heroes were, yet our folk singers and people in general have clothed him in legend. Fortunately, the facts and the circumstances of his life are still available, and the old adage is still true. Truth is stranger than fiction. Certainly in the life of Casey Jones, his exploits could not be fictionalized to be greater than they actually were. With the mandate of history, it is our purpose on this record to make Casey Jones real to you, and to reveal to you what a great man he was. After many hours of research, we have rewritten the song. Our research disclosed many different versions of the Ballad of Casey Jones. Two things were evident. Each song had many similar phrases and incorrect geographical points. In our rewrite of the song, we kept the phrases and discarded the incorrect geography. Now you will hear the Ballad of Casey Jones in a proper historical and geographical perspective. The tune is the folk tune used by Wallace Saunders, the engine wiper who was the original singer of the song. He was born Jonathan Luther Jones in a small town in southeast Missouri, March the 14th, 1863. At a very early age, his parents moved to Casey, Kentucky, just across the Mississippi River. Because of his boyhood home, he would be known as Casey Jones the greater part of his life. Casey went to work for the Illinois Railroad at a very early age, and by the time he had reached the age of 26 years, he was an engineer with a good reputation as a car rower. With the lucrative mail contracts and the popularity of the passenger trains, the railroad companies permitted only the best engineers to pull the passengers and mail, because it was essential that they be on time. Casey had a reputation of never being late. This, coupled with the poor judgment of a switching crew, was the cause of his untimely death at the age of 37. He pulled into Memphis on the morning of April the 29th, 1900. He was supposed to lay over that night before his run the next day, but a series of events would change his routine and subsequently cause his death. That night, the train from Chicago was 1.5 hours late, and the engineer who was to take the train on the southern run was sick and could not make the run. Casey was called to take the train on the southern run to Canton, Mississippi. He headed engine number 382 out of the Memphis yards about 2 hours late in the slow spring rain. Casey's whistle was his trademark. Up and down the Delta, people sitting in their shacks under the levee would hear his sad Irish whistle and say to themselves, "There goes old Casey making up time out there. That man can moan a whistle like a lonely whippoorwill." Casey's whistle was a long, drawn-out note, beginning softly, then rising, then dying off to a whisper. That night, Casey's whistle sounded like a wail of a lost child. Down the track ahead at Vaughn, Mississippi, there were two long freights stacked up on one siding. At the northern end of the switch, the tail end of the second freight lapped out on the main line. When Casey peered through the rain, he saw the last of the boxcars moving off the main line on the siding. It was less than a half mile ahead. He knew there was no way to stop in time. He yelled to Sim Webb, his black fireman, "Jump, Sim, jump!" Then he pulled on the brakes. Sim left the train about 300 feet before the crash. Sim Webb remembered the last thing he heard as he jumped was Casey's whistle. It was a long, low scream. From this, we can surmise that Casey died with one hand on the brake and the other on the whistle cord. It is said had not Casey stayed with the train, probably all the passengers would have been killed. So then, my friends, it is true. No greater love than this, than a man lay down his life for his fellow man. Come on, you rounders, if you want to hear a story about a brave engineer. Casey Jones was his name. On the icy road he won his fame. The man called Casey about 10:30. Gotta make a run to Canton again. Mounted to the cabin with his orders in his hand. Took a farewell trip to the promised land. Casey Jones mounted to the cabin. Casey Jones, orders in his hand. Casey Jones mounted to the cabin. Took a farewell trip to the promised land. It was early morning, it began to rain. He headed south on the cannonball train. Pour in the water and shovel the coal. Stick your head out the cabin, watch the drivers roll. I'll run her till she leaves the rail. We're 1 hour late with the southern mail. He turned to Sim and then he said, on time to Canton. Canton or we'll all be dead. Casey Jones, we gotta make Canton. Casey Jones, we'll all be dead. Casey Jones, gotta make Canton or we'll all be dead. Casey came to the curb at Bond, reached for the cord, pulled the whistle on. The switchman knew by the whistle's moan that the man at the throttle was Casey Jones. Casey pulled to a mile of the place. The back of a train was right in his face. He turned to his farmer, said, "You better jump, 'cause their 2 locomotives are gonna bump." Casey Jones, 2 locomotives, Casey Jones are gonna bump. Casey Jones, 2 locomotives are gonna bump. Casey was found in the wreck, 1 hand on the whistle and 1 on the brake. A good engineer and very brave, he saved the passengers but died with the train. All kinds of heartaches, all kinds of pain, they all ride along on a railroad train. Stories of brave men, noble and tall, the greatest of them all was Casey Jones. Casey Jones, mounted to the cabin, Casey Jones, orders in his hand. Casey Jones, mounted to the cabin, took a farewell trip to the promised land.